Hello, I'm Daryl Stenvoll-Wells. Thanks for joining me for this discussion as part of Engage's Going Green Week 2024. I'm happy to take this opportunity to discuss my experience of integrating concepts of environmental justice into my own practice, and to offer some ideas about how arts engagement practitioners working with diverse audiences might integrate these concepts into their own project design. In 2014, I founded Art Responders, a socially engaged community arts organization specializing in inclusive arts participation with a focus on minoritized communities. As the director of Art Responders over the last 10 years, I've curated art exhibitions and community arts events with social justice themes. I've also partnered with many arts organizations in the US and the UK to bring interdisciplinary teaching and learning opportunities to schools, hospitals, galleries, libraries and archives, and charitable organizations. These include Cops, Color, and Casualties, 25 Years of Artist Responses to Police Brutality, and Colorism, the Spectrum of Internalized Bias. My curatorial work has always had a strong public participation and learning component using a restorative justice framework, with school visits, youth fellowships, and free public workshops. Since 2016, I've begun facilitating resistance and protest art workshops as well, and these are some images from those. In recent years, the protest art theme and a desire to speak out on climate injustice have grown. From 2019 to 22, I managed a project for a science heritage organization delivering nature-based art activities to key Stage 3 pupils all over London. During the pandemic, all activities were moved online, and I created a video-based remote learning project with participants all over the UK and Ireland. This intensive project taught me the importance of connecting isolated young people and families with nature. One of my favorite projects from this time was Biomedia Book Arts, which I created during the pandemic. It provided over 400 sketchbooks for participants in London schools and homeschoolers, which they completed in 9 chapters, each inspired by a group of animals, plants, or fungi. Each chapter came with a 15-minute video demonstrating art activities to complete, as well as interviews with biology and ecology specialists, and recommendations for further investigation. Natural specimens were provided for those with low access to green space, and students learned to interpret their observations in cross-disciplinary and multisensory ways. For example, these pages on the Lamiaceae family show how participants drew from visual and sensory observation to complete pages on everyday herbs and the concept of synesthesia. In recent years, I've expanded Art Responders to emphasize more environmental learning opportunities in several ways. Since I've become known for inclusivity and working with diverse audiences, I'm frequently brought in to develop projects for special events, such as Heritage Months and cultural recognitions. I take a historical approach by spotlighting past and present accomplishments by under-recognized artists and scientists. The Unsung Scientist Project, shown at left, introduced under-recognized Black biologists through holographic printing. In the top middle is a slide from my Women in Zoological Art workshop, which discussed the female artists who toiled behind the scenes to produce some of the most renowned and significant zoological illustrations of the naturalist era. I also enjoy sharing cultural traditions inspired by nature or made from natural materials, such as my workshop on Vietnamese silk painting with a focus on water lilies. While some of these projects may not seem to have an obvious environmental theme, I think it's important to consider the context when incorporating concepts of environmental justice. I mostly work in economically disadvantaged communities where the effects of climate crisis are most pronounced. These communities suffer disproportionately from the health hazards of environmental degradation and have the least political power to effect change. They may face unsafe health conditions at home or work. Going into these neighborhoods with messages about choosing electric vehicles, buying more organic or plant-based foods, or increasing home energy efficiency might be inappropriate. Instead, I try to focus on increasing opportunities to observe and engage with the natural world, as well as recognizing the efforts of past and present artists, scientists, and activists of similar backgrounds who've made a difference through their work. This table shows how I went about creating an interdisciplinary project for a series of public workshops for Black History Month, targeting a wide range of ages from upper key stage 2 to adults and elders. I try to choose an art topic that will allow me to explore a natural subject in parallel, then tease out the environmental messages that can be incorporated into the session. I use my introductory slide dialogue to discuss these ideas and uncover participants' existing knowledge, experiences, or opinions. In this session, I discussed how Althea McNeish developed her own unique style of textiles with a vibrant palette that was unusual for her time. She sometimes used non-traditional plants as her subject, and of the plant families shown in her designs, the grass family seemed the most easily accessible for anyone wanting to investigate further. I introduced McNeish and talked about her life, her migration from Trinidad to London in 1957, and her insistence on injecting a vibrant Caribbean aesthetic into post-war British design. In the artist's own words, "Everything I did, I saw it through a tropical eye." I shared details on the grass family and why we need to change perceptions of native plants, often called weeds. I explained how these plants can be environmentally beneficial and play an important role in urban ecosystems. I showed examples of the More Than Weeds movement of rebel botanists celebrating urban native plants. Then participants were able to create their own McNeish-inspired textile fabric drawing and paint it with brightly colored, eco-friendly fabric paints. Here's another Heritage Month project delivered to schools and families in Ealing and Brent. These are both areas of high migrant populations from South Asia. While I believe we should have license to be inspired by art of many cultures, I'm careful to acknowledge my own African American experience and admit the limits of my knowledge when it comes to other cultures. For this project, I asked many questions during the presentation and allowed participants space to add their own input and experience. I had several participants from the Madhya Pradesh region who were able to add useful details on the native flora and fauna of the area, and even how paints were made from certain plant pigments. I try to incorporate a relational restorative justice pedagogy, and I think it's an essential component to teaching and learning in communities with diverse backgrounds. These intergenerational workshops were a joyful experience and were more of a knowledge exchange than a top-down teaching session. I learned as much as I taught. This is a more recent Black History Month project that gave me a chance to discuss the Afrofuturist movement and a contemporary artist whose work I admire. Through these subjects, I was able to create dialogue around the experience of racism, how imagination can become a method of survival for victims of bias, and whether a world beyond prejudice and climate crisis can be envisioned through art. First, we talked about isms and how they apply to different types of belief systems, including racism. We talked about the meaning of diaspora and how people all over the world can belong to the same identity group. We looked at how generations of Black musicians, writers, and artists have contributed to the genre, which rejects a unitary Blackness and nurtures a hybrid, fluid, and futuristic Black subject that refuses to be constructed through a white gaze. Then we delved into the work of Kenyan artist Wangechi Mutu, with its striking imagery, combining collage with drawing, painting, and sculpture. The organic forms in Mutu's work led to a guessing game about her uses of natural materials, like clay, wood, and bone, and the meanings behind her powerful hybrid female figures. Upper Key Stage 2 participants selected a collage image from 3 separate groups: human figures, natural forms, and spacer technology. They were tasked with envisioning a scene that integrated all 3 subjects harmoniously, and they used paint and pastels to bring their compositions together. These were mostly pupils aged 10 to 12, and in addition to some very powerful pieces, the adult observers remarked on their eagerness to discuss thorny concepts like racism and trauma. This was a rare project that was not a one-off workshop and instead created a series of sessions through a seed fund grant from the World Reimagined. This was a nationwide art intervention that aimed to get audiences to consider the global consequences of the transatlantic slave trade. I proposed to work in partnership with a local arts organization, Peckham Platform, in a project interrogating how public spaces reflect and affect resident communities. The student population spoke a wide variety of languages at home, with many from Spanish and Portuguese-speaking households, but also Yoruba, Mandarin, and others. We talked about how the slave trade disconnected migrants from the natural environments of their homelands, We also talked about bryophytes, the plant family including mosses, and the notion of green graffiti as a type of public art. We discussed what words existed in their home languages to describe communal practices, and created mock-ups of moss graffiti using these words. I also arranged a visit from a local architectural firm, Knox Bavin, which was in the process of designing a new community art space for Peckham Platform. After a presentation by the architects, pupils contributed to a public consultation on the upcoming Peckham Square renovation, adding their own ideas about what kind of recreational, cultural, and utilitarian communal spaces would contribute most to creating a place of shared purpose and meaning. Another Peckham Platform project paired me with a local artist to create interactive nature packs with a set of learning activities for early years participants and their carers. We featured local parks where simple natural specimens could safely be found. I designed a kit of natural specimens to share with households from local estates to avoid excluding those who might find getting out to parks more challenging. We included information on how to observe, clean, and safely work with specimens. Here are a few images from my Women in Zoological Art sessions. I'm aware that working with expendable materials like paper and fabric may not be environmentally ideal, and collaborative pieces or digital art might have a smaller carbon footprint. But I want to note that participants in these workshops often reinforce the value of having physical pieces of art to take home and give as gifts, or to preserve and display in their homes. But before I leave, I want to say a few words about areas for improvement. The combination of austerity and a global pandemic have been devastating to the GLAM sector, and operating on shoestring budgets with public stakeholders in need has had disastrous consequences for arts engagement across the UK. But for anyone watching who is in a position of decision-making on engagement programming, I'd like to advocate for these few practices that would enhance opportunities for increased quality and sustainability in arts participation. If you or your organization have pledged to integrate more sustainable practices in your engagement work, make a concurrent commitment to learning more about the intersections between environmental justice and racism, xenophobia, and other forms of oppression. Engage has compiled a set of resources, and I have added some of my own recommendations to the list, including a few short videos as a place to start. Discussing environmental practices amid daily news of environmental collapse, it's important to give people tools for action, but it's also crucial to give those most affected by climate crisis room to treasure the natural world and express climate grief and anxiety. My own work as an arts practitioner and producer is by no means perfect, and I'm constantly looking for ways to improve. I hope this presentation has given you some insight into my attempts at designing relevant and impactful arts participation programs. Feel free to reach out if you're interested in collaborating, and here's wishing you all the best in developing your own practice in this area. Happy Green Week!